What's your emergency?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the PIO Podcast, a place for all things public information related for police, fire, EMS, and local government.
It was a good learning experience for a lot of us that social media is not real life.
But we have to remember the media are very rarely a target audience. They're simply that conduit.
Our words have impacts on individuals, and it may not be positive. So just being thoughtful and mindful of the words that we speak.
I think what's so interesting about this position too, and this job and this profession, is that every one of us is looking for purpose. And when we find it here, that's it.
To know is that a crisis for one is not necessarily a crisis for another.
Hey guys, I wanted to jump on here for a minute. I hope you're enjoying our content. If you could take a moment to look in today's show notes at the bottom, you're going to see a link that says support the show. The PIO Podcast needs support to keep connecting with these amazing resources. Any amount helps. Thanks everybody. We really appreciate it. I cannot believe we are in the month of April already. In this month, we will hear from PIOs all across the country. On April 18th, we will have a live panel discussion, and the topic is transparency, the new buzzword of the 21st century. Sign up today by going to the link at the bottom of today's show notes. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode. Morning. Today on the PIO Podcast, we have Stephanie Craig. She is the president of Kith, a crisis management company. Stephanie, thank you for being on the show.
Robert, it is my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Stephanie, you have been in communications for a very long time. You've been working some extremely high-profile communications roles nationwide. Let's talk about your background a little bit before we get into the meat of today's interview.
Well, I think it's actually internationally as well. Something that doesn't really come through when you look at my digital presence is I was born and raised in Canada. I am the daughter of a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer, and I was born in the Canadian Arctic. So I am literally and figuratively a long way from home. And so I entirely educated in the U.S. And then went and was going to absolutely be a journalist, and I was set on it, and I did all the internships, and then I made a smart aleck comment at an event, and I found my way into politics. And so I've done lesson to anyone that's young and listening: smart aleck comments can have so many ramifications. And exactly. And this sent me off on an adventure that I never, if anyone had ever asked me, I would never have even contemplated. So I have the distinction, because I don't think anybody really tracks this, of being the only person to work in the U.S. House and Senate and the Canadian House and Senate.
Oh, okay. That's impressive. So you've dealt with, you've probably seen your fair share of scandals and all kinds of stuff going on there. So would you be considered like the what was the name of that movie, Scandal, or the TV show Scandal?
I've been called Olivia Pope many times. I just say that I haven't had to deal with a dead body yet, and I don't have as good of shoes.
Okay, there you go. Wow. Well, that's impressive, because anybody that can handle working in both the House and the Senate, you're definitely a better person than me, because I don't know if I can handle it.
Well, my favorite thing has always been going out on political campaigns. And it's really because I like to be talking to all sorts of different people all the time. And I think that that's very informative, especially for communicators, understanding, what people think and what your stakeholders think. That's I was always the communications person. So it was never really my role to be out talking to voters and talking to communications or talking to community people. But it really was something that I enjoyed, because you never know who you're going to meet, what you're going to learn. And so, and plus I like to say, I come from a long line of people that ran towards bullets. I just found, much to my dad's happiness, proverbial ones. So campaigns are an adrenaline rush that I appreciate, which I think is hereditary.
This time of year has got to be kind of exciting for you because this is where it really starts to ramp up now and go crazy.
Well, and it's interesting because it's almost like an itch. Like every 4 years, you start to get a little antsy, and you start kind of trying to be like, okay. But as you get older, it is a grind. Like you will work 60 to 90, 120 days in a row, and uh I think we both know that as you get older, it's a harder thing to work 3 months straight. And so I think I'm learning my limitations on campaigning.
It's a harder thing just to get out of bed sometimes in the morning when you get older. You know,
It's
it's
true.
creaks and aches and all that other fun stuff. Jump into today's interview. So let's talk about how can communication professionals gain input into their organization's messaging and strategic decisions.
Well, this my position on this is comes from politics. Uh, because of the very nature of politicians, they're always on, they're always communicating, they're always up for judgment. Communications people are very much their right hands. And that's because the strategic decisions always have to have a communications edge to them. And as I now work, I do no political work professionally anymore. And it's been quite surprising to me, honestly, that more organizations don't have communications people sitting at the leadership table. And as if you know anybody knows anything about Kith, we are, as you said, a crisis management company. So we come at things from a crisis perspective, and so many different situations can be headed off by having a extra. I will use the term external affairs in this context. Voice at the table, and I actually wrote about this in reference to the Silicon Valley Bank. And if you know anything about that situation, the way they communicated was a big piece, not the underlying piece of their problem, but it really exacerbated it. And they did not have a communications person sitting at the table to say, if you say this is going to cause people to want to take their money out of your bank. And so I am a huge advocate for having a communications person sitting at the table who there are very few other people that have just the image of the organization as their prime focus. And communications people are those people. They're always thinking, hey, how is this going to land with this constituency? How is it going to land with this constituency? And communications people tend to be partners with, in the case of PIOs, with their different division leaders, with their different functionality leaders. They're partners with them to say, hey, you're going to make this decision, and in your vacuum it makes perfect sense. But as somebody that is taking care of the reputation of this police department or this fire department, I can tell you this is what's going to happen when it hits so and so or so and so. And that is, it is as an executive and of any of those organizations, that is a critical piece of consideration that they should have when they are making decisions. And if a communications person isn't sitting at the table, they don't have it.
So, from a PIO standpoint, not from your political background and so on, but a strong communicator is very important in that position, in decision making. But in law enforcement and fire and even in local government, a lot of times they put somebody in there that's not very strong. And they're just somebody that, you know what, you fill that role for a while and you'll be in there. What do you think? What do you think about that? You really need to be strategic about who you put in that position. You can't just throw somebody in there because they got hurt and they need somewhere to go for 6 months. Because, like you said in earlier today, you said something and went into politics after that. I mean, it could even be worse for that employee because they could end up being terminated.
Absolutely. Well, I think that there is communications, in my view, has always been part education, part experience, part talent. And this is not something that if you are fighting a fire or your natural inclination and your expertise is policing, that should be your number one capability. So you need somebody who's on your side to make sure that your perspective, that your messages, who are as equally talented, is in that role. Because it is important, specifically now, like, 30 years ago, we didn't have as many news outlets. We didn't have as many cameras. We didn't have as many people being journalists or citizen journalists. And not everybody has to worry about their message. And if your primary job is to be fighting a fire, you don't want to be thinking about what the message is. Having a talented, qualified, experienced person as your partner in communications and your brand of your organization, the image of your organization, it's a really important factor to being successful. Because at the end of the day, I don't know of any big fire departments, or really even little fire departments, that are privately funded.
No.
And so if you are a publicly funded institution, there are people watching what you do, and you need to make sure that your reputation is sterling.
Right. And let's go back, like you said, 30 years ago, you had the NBCs, ABCs, CBSs, and that was it. And everybody trusted the media to tell the truth, or what they thought was the truth. And the reality of it is nowadays you could have the blogger that's a local media person that puts out a blog every Friday, and that's the person that's going to be asking that critical question.
Well, and I think that there's a little less news organizations have had their budgets slashed. So you've got reporters that are overworked and underpaid, and so they're and under-resourced. So their capacity to really dig deep into a story is really, really been depleted. There are some, I think you and I both work in a world where there are really dedicated, wonderful reporters that really believe in telling the truth. And when you have a qualified, experienced, reputable communications person, they will build those relationships, and they will build those relationships with those reporters to a place where they trust them, and their ability to help them in a honest, straightforward, factual base will be appreciated. And that goes with whoever is really your prime example. And I think that's something that a few weeks ago I was having a discussion with somebody, and they kept talking about the news media, and I just said, your prime stakeholders have never watched the local news in their life. They get their information from YouTube, TikTok, for depending on where you fall on the issue, maybe a little bit longer, maybe not. It's Instagram, if you're 35 plus, Facebook. There are very few. Discord. I have an 18-year-old stepdaughter. She does Discord. I've never been on Discord, but I can tell you that she spends a whole lot of time on it and gets a whole lot of information from it. And so understanding your stakeholders and where they are and how they want to be communicated to. If you have somebody that has a short attention span because they've grown up with digital media, you better understand that you have to communicate in very quick, tight bursts, possibly video. Understanding who your stakeholders are and what their what their characteristics are is critically important to any kind of external communication. Because if you're trying to put out even we work with a number of higher education colleges in warm parts of the country, so they have hurricane challenges and lots of weather, and they understand. And for folks that aren't familiar, community colleges, their age range is very wide, their technological savvy is very wide, so they have developed this very large communications web that involves tweet xing 7 times a day so information gets out, but also sending out actual paper mailings And so understanding your audience and how they communicate is a critical piece of all of this.
I know there's a pretty good. He's not a journalist, but he's more like an influencer, Eric Qualman.
Mm-hmm.
And Eric Qualman used to do a thing every year, and it was the social media revolution. And one of the things he put out a couple of years ago, that attention span of the average human went from 7 seconds down to 6 seconds in a matter of a year, and it's probably less than that now. So if you can't get somebody's attention in those first 5 or 6 seconds, they're probably going to scroll to the next thing or jump ahead. So you better have something great in those first few seconds or they're gone. And having somebody that's experienced with that is critical for you to get your message out. So yeah, I agree. And everybody's different. So you're not always queuing to that younger community, but you still have to know how to reach everybody in your community. So it's important to grasp that. And I think still in government, especially law enforcement and fire and EMS, they're still struggling to figure out how to do that consistently. And everybody's, they've locked into social media platforms and that's all they want to do. And they're afraid to jump into others or try a different medium to try and reach out. And, the whole reason I started doing this podcast was to try and connect people, other PIOs across the country so that they could learn from each other. That's really what it was meant about. And now, a word from our sponsor. In today's climate, you need to be able to communicate, whether you're communicating to those you serve, your peers, or your constituents. Whether you're looking for professional development or to work with a professional, John Guilfoyle Public Relations has you covered. From crisis communications to website development, visit our website at jgpr.net or call us directly at 617-993-0003 to get started today. We'll help you tell your story strategically. Now let's return back to our episode.
Well, and I think the other thing is a communications person in working in conjunction with people that are interacting day to day with their biggest stakeholders, their community, can say things like, okay, our community is largely Latino. Why are we not communicating in Spanish? Or our community is largely Vietnamese. Why aren't we also communicating in Vietnamese? And so that deep understanding is something that I think the on the ground people have and the communications people care about. And so them working together is going to make sure that the information that needs to get out from emergency notices to telling great stories. I was listening to one of your podcasts with the PIO from the Indianapolis Police Department.
Yeah.
And
she's great.
I now kind of want to go find all of the stories that she's been doing about telling their story about the people behind the badge.
They are all phenomenal. Amazing. Right. She's done a great job with that.
And I think that's where a really talented communications person comes through.
Yeah, I agree. Stephanie, you talk about the crisis life cycle. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that and explain a little bit?
So a crisis life cycle it's really something that we've developed from our engagement, really. And so it looks, like so many different other ones. And it runs through learn, recognize, mitigate, navigate, and recover. And what we like to say is that you can learn at the beginning, which is what we really preach as an organization, which is there are a lot of things you can do before a crisis to prepare for it. And it's part of it is what we like to call being crisis confident. It means that people know what they're doing. They know who they report to. They know who your stakeholders are. You know how they communicate, where they communicate. You can learn all of that stuff and have it all in place and ready to go. And then that makes recognizing crisis. Communications people, because they have that really wide view, can see pieces coming together better than a lot of other functions. And so if you are steeped in your community, steeped in your stakeholders, steeped in the people that matter most to your organization, you can recognize when a crisis is going to hit, and that gives you a heads up to being able to mitigate it. And if you've done all the work, if you've worked with your stakeholders, you've built trust with your stakeholders, they're going to believe you when you say, I know that there's someone out there saying that the sky is orange, but we can tell you, we know the sky is purple. And because you've invested all of this time in creating that relationship, creating that trust, understanding who they are, showing them who you are, they're going to be like, oh yeah, I know you. Yeah, you're right. The sky's purple. And that's what we mean by pre-work into the mitigating. And when you do all of that sort of stuff, when you have all the people in place, when you have all the information that you know you're going to need, and you understand your processes, it gives you an ability to mitigate it. And then once you've understood how you're going to mitigate it, how you're going to manage your way through it, that's when you start to recover. You don't wait till it's over. You start, it's almost when you're driving out of a turn, you start accelerating before you fully made the turn. So you go back, you've figured out how you're mitigating it, you're handling it because you're prepared, and you're already focused on your recovery. And then the learning. So if you haven't followed our advice, you're learning at the end. Because you've been through this, and it hurt, and it was a really bad day, and it was a really bad, no good day. And you are going to learn. I think regardless of if you've done the prep work, you should always take a look back and learn and say, this went well, this didn't go well, because then it's going to happen again. And that's why it's a cycle, because it never ends. You're always learning. Crisis, it's a crisis because it happens when you least expect it. And so that constant work is important. And we have something that we call a crisis of the month. It was originally titled "Oh Crap," but we figured
I love it. The old crap.
We figured that wasn't really,
That's a good one.
marketable.
Oh crap!
And so every month we send out a little prompt, and if anybody finds me on LinkedIn, I'm happy to add them to it. But we preach, we do workshops with people. We come in, they're not $2. And so, but those should happen once, twice, 3 times a year. But that constant readiness comes from being at a staff meeting, holding up a newspaper or a phone and saying, if this happened to us, what would we do? And it can be that easy. And so one of the things that we've done for folks to remind them that they need to keep doing this is we have a free little service that is no longer called Oh Crap, but it's called Crisis of the Month. And it's done via Substack. And every month we send out to our group of people a free little prompt that says, here's the crisis. Here are the 4 questions you should ask. Take it to your staff meeting.
I love that. That's great, because it's so easy to do. It's such a simple thing to do, and gets everybody thinking that there's a potential, because it always, well, what do we do?
Right.
That's usually what the question is. What do we do? Mm-hmm. And they all turn to the communications person for that answer.
Right. And I think there's, we would say that everybody, if you're doing this right, everyone should know what they do. But this puts a fine point on it. If in the staff meeting, folks look at you and say, well, what do we do? You have to think, we should probably do some training. We should probably do some planning, because Bob doesn't know what he's supposed to do in the middle of a crisis. And he's pretty important.
I agree. Stephanie, you've talked about speed, clarity, and trust. Can you elaborate on that and talk about all those?
Well, speed, clarity, and trust are the ingredients in being crisis confident. So speed is the single most important thing in being able to recognize, mitigate, and navigate a crisis, but not speed for speed's sake. And what I mean by that is that you are fast because you know all the things beforehand. You are fast and you can see it because you've done the work. You can begin mitigating it faster because you have done the work. And then you can navigate it better because you have done the work. And the ability to get recovered, you can do it all faster because you've done the work. Clarity and trust are the two ingredients to speed, for speed being an output of being prepared. So when I say clarity, I mean, and I've kind of referenced this a little bit before, you know who you are. You know what your values are. You know what you stand for. You know who matters most to you. So who are your most important stakeholders? What matters to them? And you also know kind of what's going to knock you off course. For almost anybody that has a computer, it's a cybersecurity incident, or some sort of employee misconduct. Those types of things, you know that those are most likely going to be what befalls you, or if you're a person-centered organization with a technological backbone. So you think about those more. Being hit by an asteroid, less ability to control, so you don't think about it as much. And then trust. The trust part of this is, you know, the systems, you know, the processes. And I'm sorry, that is a very Canadian thing. I'm not sure if it's processes or processes in America. That's one of the words that gives me away. So, you know, the processes and the people will perform in the moment. And that comes back to what I just said. You don't want to be in an actual crisis and have Bob looking at you saying, I don't know what I need to do, or I don't know who I report to, or have anybody ask, who's the spokesperson and how do we approve a statement? You need to know all of that before the day hits. And so that's the clarity on who you are, who matters to you, how you communicate, what your values are, the trust that all the people are going to do what they need to do. They're going to use the processes you've set out, and they're going to understand the different systems that you have. That equals the speed, because speed is an output of knowing what you're doing.
And I think for the most part, most public sector agencies, especially law enforcement now, has gotten really good about knowing who their constituency is and knowing what their brand is. I know most agencies now are very consistent about their brand. They try to be. I think where some of them fall off at is that they're not very clear on how they're going to put that out because of legal issues that come into the way, or the politics that come into the way, because then you start getting trustees and mayors and council members and so on that might interject themselves into the process, right?
And it's understanding that, because it's, for some folks, politics is natural. Me, for instance, I did not follow my father into the footsteps into law enforcement, because politics was just a more natural fit for me. So understanding those ramifications is really important. My dad used to tell me, he's like, I don't like lawyers, I don't like reporters, and I don't like politicians. And then I went and became two of the three and thought about law school. And so I think it's very much important for people to work with people that have different functions and different talents, to think about that external. And what we call that is, it's something we talk about very, very well, which is second level thinking. And second level thinking is, okay, this is going to be the outcome of this. What is the outcome of that? So it's almost the ripple effects of what's going to happen. So we're going to create this partnership with this organization, and these are the benefits of it. Is somebody sitting there thinking, saying, okay, well, these are the benefits. Is this going to upset anybody? Mm-hmm. Who are they connected with that could upset our most important stakeholders? So thinking through what the next step is, we call it the and thens and the 5 whys. So you ask, okay, and then, and I believe there's a Saturday Night Live sketch about this. And then, no, it's not Saturday Night Live. It's Dude, Where's My Car? It is a movie, and I am giving you so many insights into my
Your humor, yeah,
my
I like
personality.
it. Yes, love it.
So it's, and then what? And then what? And then what? And then you ask someone, well, okay, well, this is a great idea. Why? Blah, 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 blah. Why? So you ask why 5 times. So people really have to think about the ramifications. So if you are a publicly funded organization, thinking, all right, we're going to do this, going to take this action. Who are our stakeholders? Community stakeholders, government stakeholders. How is that going to land with the counselor from, X district? How is that going to land with the mayor? How is that going to land with our state legislature? So thinking through those ripple effects of decisions, when you were talking about reputation and you're talking about your brand name, and what we like to say is, you own your brand, the public owns your reputation. And what we mean about that is that your reputation is what people think of you. And you can do so many things to shape what people think of you, but they are the ones that own it. If something changes their opinion, your reputation changes. And so understanding who those people are, and I know I'm harping on this, but it's so important to think about, to know who your constituents are and how they're going to react to things, and how the people that they're important to, how are they going to react to things. Thinking things out 2 and 3 levels is going to stave off a lot of problems, because you see it before it becomes a problem.
Okay. Got it. So let's talk about officer-involved shootings. How feasible is it for the agency to control the narrative, and is it even possible?
Well, this is something that is very, very personal to me, being a cop's kid. So I'm going to leave the on the ground decision making to the people that do this in the day to day. But I really believe that so much of the work around any sort of police actions, officers involved shootings, that is really informed by the work that these different agencies do with their stakeholders. How operations are conducted after an officer involved shooting are going to be decided beforehand. Who you talk to is going to be decided beforehand. So specifically in something like this, where harm and people's lives have been affected, you need to be able to rely on decisions that were made before that moment. Decisions with those types of magnitudes should not be made at the time.
Okay. All right. So you, in a previous interview, you talked about the crisis might be happening to an organization, but there are people in the organization that the crisis impacts. So what thought process should they have about that? What considerations should a public sector agency have?
I think it's a couple things that I've been thinking around this on 2 different fronts. I'm going to give a speech to a bunch of HR folks.
Okay.
And I'm building the deck, which PowerPoint is the bane of my existence. But the thinking around that is, a crisis happens, but no organization is made of cardboard. All organizations are made of people. And so ensuring that the HR folks, the human resource folks are sitting at the table in crisis preparation is important, because the people in the organization are going to be impacted. Right. They're also messengers. So making sure you understand how to communicate with your own internal teams is important. Understanding that anything you send internally to more than 2 people is public. Understanding that making sure your employees understand that they may not be official spokespeople, but they're still messengers. And so under working with your HR professionals to make sure that your employees are as informed as you feel comfortable with. Every organization is different, and everyone's levels of comfort are different. But making sure you understand that level of comfort, making sure you can understand how any decision is going to impact your employees is important. Employee morale in the midst of crisis is critically important. So working with HR to understand what's going to make your employees feel better. Not, in bad situations, no one's going to walk in and be Mr. Rogers, but what's going to make them feel more secure. So that HR piece is important. But the other side of it is, and I've been thinking about this morning, and someone was talking about Boeing, the CEO of Boeing stepping down. So if something goes really off the rails, there are certain people that are going to be casualties of it. The head of an organization is the first one. And so understanding the ramifications of crisis decisions on the people that are important to you internally. And I'm always a little shocked when I'm talking to organizations and they don't list their employees as first, second, or third largest stakeholder groups, because these folks are the life breath of your organization. And everywhere from the top to the most recent hire, they need to factor into the decisions you are making because they're impacted.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Here's another crisis I wanted to bring up, and it's kind of like, yeah, you know what, people are over it now, but the whole Princess Kate thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what a communications nightmare. And I know it's a different world when you're talking to the British and the institution of the monarchy, but just from the general perspective of communications, there was so much mismanaged there. I mean,
Yeah.
hopefully they were all fired. That was the communication team, but I don't think so.
Well, I'm gonna preface this by saying, remember that as a Canadian, so just I'm a Canadian and an American, but having grown up in Canada, I was a subject of the monarchy, and so I think folks that are from different parts of the world would have a different perspective because we have a front row seat to nothing's gonna derail the monarchy. You think back to 30 years, 1997. Camilla Parker Bowles was the most hated human being in most of the world because she broke up, Diana and Charles. And so I think there's a real, for them, there's a real, it's a word I'm looking for, disconnect from their need to communicate. And I do truly believe that they could have weathered this storm, and it was truly probably Princess Catherine's. And I this is something that just makes me crazy. And I am not a monarchist, but her name is not Kate Middleton anymore. It makes me crazy, but it was her tolerance, I think, that drove the need to communicate. And when it started to be that being silent was going to hurt her kids more than speaking out would hurt her kids, I think that became the tipping point for them. But as far as a general communication perspective goes, there's an old adage in politics. You need to define yourself before your opponent defines you.
Mm-hmm.
Because a communications vacuum is going to be filled by somebody.
Yeah. Look at all the speculation that happened from this. I mean,
absolutely.
Oh my God, it went on. TikTok was off the rails with it from everything.
Well, yeah. Well, Blake Lively did an ad based on it.
I did not know that.
Yes, she literally did I think it was an Instagram story. She has this alcohol brand, Betty something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she photoshopped her head onto some 90-year-old body. And so, the speculation just became mainstream. Stephen Colbert, for instance. And they deserve a level of privacy? Absolutely. But understanding that because of their notoriety, that people are going to be curious, you have to figure out how to balance that.
Right.
And in that is, should they have done some sort of announcement, use it as a teaching moment? They're actually much more in the vein of a police department or a fire department, right? They are publicly funded.
Right.
And so they owe a little bit more transparency than I think they understand.
Yeah. And I think the thing that got me the most upset about that whole thing was the whole Photoshop photo. Does anybody think that Kate put that photo out? I'm sorry, no, I don't think so. I don't think she did that. I don't care if she said that she was asked to fall on her sword and put a statement out, but the reality of it is that was some staffer that said, let's put a photo out and not think about the leaves on the plants and how poorly the photo was. Nobody's going to figure it out.
Well, and I think it's interesting though, because the more we got upset about it here, the more the Brits came to their defense.
Yeah.
And that's something that's really knowing your stakeholders.
Yeah.
We fought a war to get away from you folks. And I am based in Southern Virginia. I live in Yorktown, Virginia, the home of the surrender of the British. And so it is not lost on me that we are not their number one stakeholders.
Right. I mean, the whole stiff British upper lip thing, I get it. That whole thing. All right, Stephanie, let's, anything you want to add right now?
No, I was just going to say, I think that they thought that by talking about King Charles cancer, that was going to be enough of a distraction.
Right.
But they underestimate how loved I almost did it to myself, Princess Catherine is.
You're right. You're absolutely right. All right, let's go to some rapid fire questions. How about that?
Sure.
Texting or talking?
Text.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate, without a doubt.
Coffee
Canadian
or
chocolate.
There you go. Coffee or tea?
Cop's kid, lots of black coffee.
Adult drink of choice?
I don't drink.
Oh, okay. Is there a book or author who's had an influence on you?
This is going to sound strange. It's not a particular author, but it was my mom who instilled a deep, deep love of reading. I currently have 5 books on the go.
That's okay. Nothing wrong with that. If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Invisibility. I'd want to be places where no one knew I was.
There you go. Ask permission or beg for forgiveness?
Forgiveness. Absolutely.
What place do you most want to travel to?
Easter Island. I am obsessed with how those Maori statues got there.
Guilty pleasure food?
Oh, something I cannot eat because I am deadly allergic to it. Lobster.
Ooh, that's too bad. If you could choose to have coffee with any historical figure, living or dead, who would it be?
My dad. My dad passed away last year, so
oh,
it would be
I'm
my
sorry.
dad.
Sorry to hear that. What key points would you like to add to our listeners today? What can they take away from the interview?
I think the fact that your folks are PIOs, just my indebted respect for them and gratitude for what they do. It's not an easy job. I think people, if you're of a certain age and you've watched Bridget Jones, they talk about fanning around with press releases. That isn't this job. It's very personal. It's literally 24/7. And it's my deep, deep appreciation for what your listeners do.
And I'm sure they'll appreciate that. Stephanie, how can people best reach out to you if they want to connect or if they need your company services?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and then they can email me. My email address is S as in Stephanie, Craig, CRAIG, at Kith, KITH.co. There is no M.
I will add all that into the show notes so people will be able to find it. Stephanie, thank you for coming on the show. That's Stephanie Craig from Kith Communications. Thank you.
Thank you.